Anyway, I'm going to talk today about the 60s. Now, we can all remember the 60s, can't we? We were all there. Well, there's that old saying, isn't it, about not being able to, if you can remember it, you weren't there or something like that. But this actually, do you know what that is in the background to this?
Splashes of something.
Yeah, why does it relate to the...
Oh, it looks like a fried egg.
It's one of those
psychedelic.
Psychedelic light show. That's exactly it. This one is called Rainbow Multiverse Light Show. That's on it. I just got that as the background. I don't know if you've ever remember going to see bands playing then, but they'd have one of these that were kind of in like an oil thing, so they're moving around all the time. It was very primitive compared with modern day light shows, but it seemed pretty impressive at the time, or as we might have said, pretty trippy. So I'm going to talk about fashion, a lot of it. People like Diana Rigg, Carnaby Street, Swinging London, the hippies, and I'm ending it with a personal story. Do you remember Jean Shrimpton?
Oh, yes.
This was her when she was 22 and a model. I mean, she was a very beautiful woman, I think. There was an excellent model. And she'd gone to Australia, and she'd turned up at the Melbourne racecourse May Day in 1965 in a white shift dress made from a synthetic material that she was helping to promote. She'd been paid £2,000 to advertise it, and they hadn't given her enough fabric to make it. So she made it shorter than it would have been in order to be able to get by with the amount of cloth that she'd been given. So there it was. It's actually not really, it's considered to be the moment the mini skirt was invented, but it's not a skirt for a start. And it's compared with some of the ones that came along, it's not an exactly mini, is it?
No, it's not. It's perfect, really. I don't like mini skirts much. I'm the wrong era.
Oh, and Mary Quant was before 1965, wasn't she? Or around then?
Yeah, I'm coming on to Mary Quant. Mary Quant on the left and one of the mini dresses on the right.
Yes, that's very mini.
She's actually, she died in April this year. Which I'd forgotten about that. I didn't realize she'd died because she was born in 1930. So she was quite old. And as we all know, she was a designer and a fashion icon. I think her distinctive hairstyle was created by Vidal Sassoon, another kind of person from the Swinging Sixties, you might remember. So she was a very important figure in the 1960s London-based fashion scene, the mod and youth fashion movements, and played quite a large part in that culture. She's supposed to have taken credit, as Jackie was alluding to the miniskirt. I think it probably is more likely that it was started off by her than just by Jean Shrimpton. By the way, the people in Australia were totally horrified by it, that she hadn't gone to there with a hat on for a start. She was responsible or given credit for the miniskirt and, wait for it, the hot pant. Do you remember those?
Oh, yeah.
I do.
Yes, I used to wear them.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
She opened.
Yeah, go on.
My landlady had those.
Wow, what a landlady! Right, there you go. Sounds like the beginning of a sitcom. That.
I fell in love with my landlady.
Well, I could quite imagine. I could understand it. Anyway, she opened up a original boutique in a bazaar on King's Road, and it became very, very famous for it. Another big store at that time, or a bit later, was Bieber. Do you remember Bieber?
Bieber.
I remember the name, but that's about it.
Well, it became, as you can see, it even featured in a Victorian Albert Museum.
Victorian album
on Bieber. It was in the 1960s and 70s, primarily run by a Polish-born woman called Barbara Hulanicki, who got some backing from various stores, and they eventually opened up they bought the Derry and Tom's department store on Kensington High Street. I can remember going to that. Do you remember that? It was a huge thing.
Yeah.
It attracted up to 1 million customers. It was extremely successful, and there are a whole series of Bibas around. Though they eventually closed in 1975. They came, they saw, they conquered, and then they died, which seems to be happened with a lot of things like fashion shows. And this is, I was Lord Kitchener's valet. Because at the same time that women's fashions were developing, men's fashions were too. It achieved fame as in the swinging London by promoting antique military uniforms as fashion items. It was opened by an Ian Fisk and John Paul in Portobello Road. Did anybody remember going to it? Has anybody been to it? I went to it once when I was in London.
Yes. Yeah.
And again, it was incredibly popular, including amongst its customers, Eric Clapton, Mick Jagger, John Lennon, and Jimi Hendrix. It's interesting that they were harking back in a way to Edwardian and Victorian times. It's becoming fashionable again. Now, just going to Manchester for a minute. Are any of you aware or know of the 8th Day still going?
Yeah, well, in the olden days, yes.
Yeah, it was. The first one was opened actually just at the end of this in 1970. I've included it on New Brown Street in the middle of town. It was burnt out though for some reason, and so they came to All Saints, the kind of student area, to open it. It's a workers' cooperative, and it's been going since the 1970s and very successful. I don't know if any of you came with me. Maureen, did you come on that visit to the?
I did, yeah. There was a cafe, wasn't there? We all sort of went and had a bite
to the cafe and had. I think it's a really good vegan or vegetarian cafe that they still.
It's got a nice feel about it. It's really nice when you go in.
It's a lovely place. I'm really glad it survived.
Yeah.
But it was originally mainly clothing, as you can see from the early one in 1970, I think it was. The one on the left is from 1973, where it looks very, very higgledy-piggledy. It looks in a bit of a mess there, doesn't it? It's obviously revived a lot since then. Yeah, so it became a vegetarian cafe, which was great. Right. I don't know whether anybody's got any photos of themselves, but this is me at the time.
Oh, that's
the coat I'm wearing, I think I actually bought from On the 8th Day. It was a second-hand German officer's coat. It's a huge, big leather coat that went down. It was so heavy, though, I eventually gave it up because it was so heavy just walking around in it. It was like walking around.
I can imagine. They were.
You look quite cool there, Bernard.
They were very cool, weren't they? Very cool. We'll come on to cool leather, Lorraine. I don't know if anybody else has got any photos, and it'd be very interesting.
I've got one from when I went to work at a holiday camp in the 60s.
Oh, yeah. Do you want
it's a
to
bit
show it?
blurry. I don't know if you can.
Hang on, let me have a look. I'm going to stop share. Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Where were you?
Press that in holiday camp. That's when I had a wob lad worked in an office, and then decided I didn't need to stay there. I could go and do something different.
The big holiday camp that was there.
In Wales, yes,
Yeah,
that's still
Press
there.
that
Press
in.
that in holiday camp.
Yeah, we used to go there to our caravan in Rhyl.
Oh yes, it's further down there. Yes.
And my dad, who liked playing with language in the way that has now transmitted to me, always used to say as we went through it, press that in your pipe and smoke it.
Okay.
Totally relevant.
You're like a photo-fit student, aren't you?
Oh yes, excellent.
Yes, I think
Really fit the bill.
on the right was the earlier one. Just I don't know why I got those glasses. I think it was my girlfriend thought they looked good, but anyway. And then I moved on to more kind of John Lennon-y type ones. Right, moving on to fashion. Somebody, I don't know which book it was, said the sound of the 60s is male, the look of the 60s is female. And of course, the Beatles, oddly, were persuaded by their manager, I think, to wear suits, weren't they? The famous Beatle jackets, which never really caught on. Who wants a jacket without a collar? I mean, it was stupid, I think. but they of course, and at the time, whilst men did go to Beatles concert, it was overwhelmingly female, and they made so much noise that you couldn't possibly hear the music, which then was repeated with the invasion of America, which I remember reading about at the time because I thought the Beatles were fantastic, and I was really pleased when America got totally bound up in it as well. And for a time, British music really was absolutely the height of fashion, not just the Beatles, Rolling Stones, and so on. Diana Rigg.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to make it a bit smaller so you can see it all. As Emma Peel in The Avengers. Presume you remember that. Her full name, which I think really surprised me. Well, you know, she became a dame. She was made a dame.
Yeah.
Dame Enid Diana Elizabeth Rigg. So really, she should have been called Enid Rigg. But I don't think we would have remembered that. But again, I thought she was a fantastic actress. And long before she came in to play Emma Peel in The Avengers, she was working for the Royal Shakespeare Company and doing lots of very serious drama. She was a very good actress. She was actually born in Doncaster, but spent the first years of her life in India, where her father worked as a railway in the help setting up the state railway in Rajasthan. She spoke Hindi as a second language as a result.
Oh, interesting.
So she appeared in the 60s series The Avengers opposite who she play against?
Patrick
Very good, you got it.
What?
Troughton.
McNee.
No, McNee. Yeah.
What was it? Who did he play? John.
Steed.
Correct, John Steed. And she was the secret agent Emma Peel in 51 episodes.
I saw her in Abelard and Eloise in London, but I might have been round about 1970. And I can't, it might have been Paul Schofield who was with her, and she was absolutely starkers.
Oh,
I wish I'd
God.
been
That's very brave.
Thanks for sharing that with us, Jackie. Anyway,
the naked truth.
in the second series of Emma Peel, she held out from a pay rise from £150 a week to £450, the amount that the co-star was getting. And she said, as she said later in 2019, when she was interviewed, not one woman in the industry supported me. Neither did Patrick McNee, her co-star. I was painted as this mercenary creature by the press when all I wanted was equality. It's so depressing that we're still talking about the gender pay gap. So good for her. Good for her. Anyway, so she was.
Yeah, absolutely.
So she ended up as Lady Olenna Tyrell in Game of Thrones, as the paternal grandmother of Marguerite Tyrell. She actually said she was witty and sarcastic in that, very, very good, and she got various awards for it. In April 2019, Rigg said she had never watched Game of Thrones before her time on the show, which I rather admire her for. Though again, she died in September 2020, so this is somebody else who passed on, but very fondly remembered.
I think she's capable. She covered so much ground and so much acting. The Game of Thrones is a nice epitaph, but she's responsible for absolutely wonderful things. I
know if you look at her the thing on Wikipedia about it, it goes on for about 2 or 3 pages with all the things she did. She's
fabulous. Yeah.
I think we all agree on that. Diana Rigg was fabulous.
I think you've got a soft spot for her, Bernard.
I have, yeah. I think she's terrific. I love her, which is great. Anyway, this is moving on to the Swinging Sixties more generally. In 1967, John Stephen, he owned 10 boutiques in Carnaby Street alone after starting one up. His clothes were cheap and cheerful. And it could be said that he was an ancestor of the cheap and cheerful mass market shops you have now, places like Primark and Uniqlo. It was mainly driven by men's clothes rather than women's clothes as well. you remember this? The Time article about swinging London. This was from 1966. And this is what it said, a part of it. Talking the flip jargon that has become basic English for teenagers, jet setters, and indeed any knowledgeable adult striving to maintain the illusion that he is at least young in heart, the switched on London bird or beetle calls his herb, super fab groovy gear close or with it. Ready, steady, go. There's a whole scene going, chirps Kathy McGowan, 22, moderator on ITV's Ready, Steady, Go, and London's favourite dolly of the moment. It's kind of patronising, isn't it, to say the least? A bit weird language that they're using, but it did help put the whole thing, if you like, a stamp on it. And even though it was probably more hype than reality, I mean, the vast majority of people were totally untouched by this. It was mainly people in London and mainly young people. It definitely was, though, the emergence of the importance of the youth culture.
And time readers.
Yeah. Well, I think people only read it because of that particular one. Panda eyes, white faces, huge eyelashes, so-called dolly birds. They've been, as a critic put it, girls have been transformed into throwaway plastic objects. That was a fairly typical look, and it was typified by famous model,
Twiggy.
Interestingly, whilst I was researching this, we've got this photo from walking through Carnaby Street in the 1960s, but I came across a conference done by members of my staff when I was head of department at the MMU and I can't remember this at all, called Dolly Birds and Swinging Cities. It's in May 2016 by Katie Milestone at the MMU. And they spoke about the social revolution of the 60s. Dolly Bird, and one of them said, the term Dolly Bird has distinctly sexual connotations, as Dolly was an 18th century term for a prostitute and bird suggested sexual availability. The stars of the decade performed sexual availability through their fashions, which were more revealing than those of the 1950s. And then they looked at various things like go-go dancing and exploring women's erotic capital in the 1960s. Well, there you go. My department was part of this, then I didn't realize it at the time.
Right. We used to measure things by Twiggies. Her weight was unusually small, so we compared everything. If a car weighed, and we'd say, "Oh, that's so many Twiggies."
Yeah, she weighed 6.5 stone. She weighed 6.5 stone, 5'6", a shoe size of 4, a dress size of 6.
God.
So not everybody would have been able to fit into the dresses that she modelled.
No, absolutely not.
You ruined my adolescence, Bernard.
How's that?
Absolutely ruined it.
Go on. Why?
She ruined my adolescence because, you know, you just the clothes in the shops were clothes that, you know, girls who looked like her could wear. And, you know, I was a C cup in those days.
Yeah, it was a particular type of style, wasn't it?
It was very disappointing.
There is a view now that it was very much about infantilization. You know, the whitened eyes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It makes you look like a child.
I think they look boyish.
Boyish, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, which I find a bit strange that people find that so attractive.
Well, she looks like a waif, doesn't she? I think that's probably the best.
Yeah.
Or an urchin.
I mean, anyone shaped by like a woman was bound to feel a bit demoralised, I think.
Yes.
Let's leave it at that.
Well, really, what it was saying is, if you can't look like this, then you're not very groovy or something. I don't know what I was trying to do at the time. You're quite right.
It never did it for me.
Well, actually, I think she's got a beautiful face.
She has. Yeah.
And
no, I discovered later in life that it didn't do it for most men.
No, it doesn't. No, I think you're quite right there, Lorraine. You're very, very right on that one. But anyway, she was from Neasden, and her boyfriend was called. Does anybody remember his name? He had a French-sounding name, Justin de Villeneuve, and he came from Neasden too. And his real name was Nigel Davis.
It's
What
all a fantasy.
I think Justin de Villeneuve is much more on the it hits the button much more than Nigel Davis.
Was Twiggy the precursor to Mia Farrow in terms of that look?
She was very similar, wasn't she? Very much so.
Mm.
But models up until then had been very much posh girls, you know, from the Lucy Clayton School of Modeling type. So for her to come along as a very working class, or Cockney, as they labelled her, she was very, very different. It was seen partly as a rejection of the kind of housewife ethos of the 1950s. And it's not just about, you know, the whole about sexual liberation, whatever. It wasn't just because of the contraceptive pill, because it wasn't available to unmarried women until 1970. And there's a critique of this, of course, by the famous female eunuch that she wrote. She says, her dominion, that is the dolly, must not be thought to entail the rule of women, for she is not a woman. She is a doll, weeping, pouting, or smiling, running or reclining. She's a doll. She's an idol formed of the concatenation of lines and masses, signifying the lineaments, satisfied impotence. She is, in other words, a female eunuch. It was very influential. So all this started off in Australia with the show at the Melbourne Racecourse with Jean Shrimpton, and it's now got round to Germaine Greer, who of course was Australian too.
I think young women have always had it difficult, though. I mean, it's really difficult now for young women. You know, so many of them have got anorexia, and they see on Instagram what they're meant to look like, and
I think you're
it's the same now, really.
Yeah, it's the same. It changes. The angle it comes from is different. There's different terminologies used, but it's not a battle that's been won by women by any means, and especially I think it's very difficult for young girls. Anyway, coming on quickly because we're running out of time already. Oh gosh, the Summer of Love, 1967. I can remember going to an event in Platt Fields, which was our contribution to the Summer of Love, but it was really quite sad, the whole thing, compared with being in the Golden Gate Park in San Francisco. And I think this is the point at which the emphasis switched from London to San Francisco to California. When I was at university, I was much more, in my later years, I was much more interested in American West Coast music than I was in English music. Things like The Doors, Country Joe and the Fish, Grateful Dead, and so on. So it was a counterculture for the 1960s. There's a political element as well. The Vietnam War. I met Americans at Manchester University when I was there, and they were draft dodgers at the time. Wonderful, wonderful people, and they had a big influence on me. It was all about peace, love, sex, and LSD. There's a Sgt. Pepper LP, which you can see there, which has got very much that Edwardian theme in the dress that they've got in the center. Psychedelia, hippies, the human being in Golden Gate Park, San Francisco, an emphasis on religious and cultural diversity. Remember their trip to see the Maharishi, the ethnic look, and the cult of youth. And this is the hippie bug. And the light show in the background. I like that car, don't you? I think it looks terrific. I'd like that. I'd still go around in that if I had that. And then I just looked.
All right.
I just put hippie in the search engine. These are the two things it came up with: a 1960s, 1970s disco party costume Masquerade for discos, men's cosplay costume, £22. Cheaper for the women. Hippie retro vintage 1970 disco dress women's costume for cosplay. Cosplay in a way is the modern equivalent, partly, isn't it? That you play up as these things. The guy on the left looks particularly weird to me. There's some right. I'm going to have a go at this, and I don't know whether it's going to work out. So bear with me. This is my particular recollection of that time. It's from 1969, and I was just reached the 68, 69, and I just reached the end of my degree, and with a group of us. And this is I've used image generation software to come up with the images based on what happened. So this is us going off to Southport, well, not to Southport, to Ainsdale Beach to drop acid, take LSD. Whoops, wrong way. This is us arriving at the sand dunes in our cars. Very much, it didn't look quite like that, but by then we were all going a bit weird. And several of them, this is quite a good one, actually. Were quite a few of us who went in several cars, and I wandered off by myself for a bit, and a group of them were sitting in the sand dunes. I don't know if they've been know Ainsdale Nature Reserve. Beautiful, beautiful place, still is. It's got sand dunes, pine forest, and they saw a remote controlled aeroplane coming above them. Some of them thought it was a real aeroplane, and it actually crashed nearby them. So that was quite weird for them. There you can see the airplane in the background, and they're talking amongst themselves as we go. Meanwhile, I'd gone off to the edge of the sea, which is always far out in Southport, as you know.
Yes.
I saw this girl who was one from our party, who was looking a bit disturbed, and there were cars on the beach at Ainsdale at that time, and she ran up to a car and ran in front of. They weren't going fast. Ran in front of him and said, "Help! Stop me! I'm dying! I've died! I'm dead! Take me to the hospital!" And so the car driver took her into the car and drove her down to the first aid station. There it is. I'm seeing it just happening there. We've got how many minutes? Not long. So I thought, I can't. We're all going to get arrested. They're going to just gather them up when they find out what's going on. So I felt I had to find. So I ran after the car. It wasn't far away from the entrance, and they dropped her off at the first aid station. There was a police station as well, a police point just nearby. So she ran towards them, and they were saying, "What's wrong with you?" And she was saying, "I'm dead. I'm dying. I'm dying. I'm dying." And she said, "What? Have you got heat stroke? Have you got it?" "No, I'm dead. I've taken LSD. I've taken acid." And I came along at the time, and I said, "No, she hasn't. She's just she's broken with her boyfriend, and she's just she's just feeling upset about it." And they said, "Well, if you can take her away, we'll let you do that." And so I did. I got her into a car. No, I didn't get into a car. I didn't know where my car was. I got onto the road, and two old women in a Volkswagen like this stopped and gave us a lift. They got us a lift, and I eventually saw my car. We got into my car. I drove back. How I drove back, I don't know. Got back. There was one, and then when I got there, by then she calmed down, and she was still at the first aid station. And all the other people who'd been on the trip saying, "Oh, wasn't that fantastic?" And they were commiserating with her over having had such a bad trip, whereas I'd saved them all from everything, and nobody acknowledged it.
That's life, I'm afraid.
That is life, isn't it? So
Yeah.
I thought you were going to end the story with saying, "And I married her."
yeah. I was that man. Yes.
I was going to ask you that, TJ. Did your landlady love you back?
We sort of went out on a date.
That's
I'm glad you made it back in one piece, Bernard.
Yes.
Yeah.
I did. Okay, so see you all soon. Have a good day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay then.